Welcome to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 18th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun, or if you choose, the Moon too. I'm going to give you an overview of which we can all collectively relate to, but please stay with me. I will go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces and share the chart wheel for each to give you a really detailed insight of what you can expect. It's a huge week, to be honest, because the week begins with the energy of the quarter moon that occurred on last Sunday still pouring its energy into this week, but that combined with the Neptune cazimi, a quite unique event. But we do have the Sun returning home to the start of its journey in the sign of Aries on a Wednesday, one of the most momentous parts of the whole year, but this year it links to the potent energies of Pluto for the first time in over 200 years. What an incredible event. But also we have Venus, very influential this week, forging a potentially testing link with Saturn, but a gloriously providential one, lucky, with Jupiter, which peaks as the week draws to a close. Also, Mars is going to replace the Sun in the sign of Pisces. If you're new to my channel, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any thoughts, please share them. I try to interact with each comment. This is very much a community. If you're a returning visitor, thank you so much for joining me once more. Your likes, comments, shares and subscriptions are gratefully appreciated. If you've yet to subscribe to my channel, if you do, please click or tap on the bell notification symbol so every time I drop a video you will get an alert. So as this week begins, the potency of the quarter moon is still very strong, and that is because the sign of Gemini, where the moon occurred, is not where the moon is immersed in a particularly emotionally connected way. It's much more to do with quick messages. However, the Sun and Neptune, which came together as the week drew to a close with that Neptune cazimi, squared up to the quarter moon together. So a quarter moon between the 3rd and the 12th house is quite complex at the best of times, but if we put Neptune in there, the ruler of the 12th house, we heighten the sensitivity to a huge level. As we begin this week, therefore, we may find ourselves deeply and profoundly affected by the energy and emotion of the people we encounter. Even things we read, social media, can affect us a lot of the time, I feel, but we're going to be even more potentially influenced by it, but not necessarily in a good way. It may therefore be, as we come into this new week, that we do create a little bit of space for ourselves just to catch our thoughts, to meditate a little bit, go for a walk in nature, but most of all, in some way protect ourselves for those draining energies from which we have no complete control. So, for example, if we meet somebody and we start talking to them, even if they're not saying anything that's particularly negative, if they're not in a good place, the chances are you're going to download their energy in quite a profound way. Also, it's easy for us to open up and say something quickly with the moon in the 3rd house and therefore reveal something of a more confidential or sensitive nature, which we could then go on to regret. So it is going to be very important, if someone's told us something in confidence, that we keep that very much to our chests. But also we're aware that gossip can be part of the equation as we start this new cosmic week. The great news about the Sun combining with Neptune, of course, is that it can be very compassionate, but it's more difficult to set our boundaries. So I think generally physical vitality is going to be rock bottom as we start this week. But the glory of astrology is the cycles, and by Wednesdays the Sun bursts its way into the fire sign of Aries, which is governed by the feisty Mars. We begin the new Western tropical calendar. This also ushers in something called the first cardinal quadrant. Now, if you're familiar with this principle, it means that the next 13 weeks, which takes us through to the summer solstice, is the first part of the energy that we're working with this year. And the sign of Aries is cardinal, and of course is very much to do with action and taking the initiative. So whichever zodiac sign we are, the next 13 weeks can be a busy time for us all, particularly if we're wanting to get something off the ground, start something afresh, fire up something that's ongoing, that's important to us. But this particular spring equinox links to Pluto in Aquarius for the first time in over 200 years. The sign of Aquarius is the collective. It's also a humanitarian sign. It can be to do with higher values. Of course, the sign of Aquarius has its downsides. It can be a bit detached, a bit cool. But Pluto, being the transformer, but also the truth seeker, in this link to the sun's passion in the sign of Aries, is really, really exciting. I feel over the last few years, there has been such a lot of manipulation of reality. And we're all drip-fed this stuff almost all the time. What this particular aspect does is strengthen us all, gives us more desire to really listen to the truth that we really believe is the fact. And that can give us the furnace of energy to move forwards in a much more productive way. But I mentioned in my brief intro that Venus was very influential this week, and from Tuesday through to Sunday, it's aligning with Saturn. Now, Venus in the 12th house, in terms of the collective astrology, can be quite challenging because this can be a time when we're very nostalgic and thinking about past connections and people. Maybe even someone from our past is going to get in touch. But when we've got Saturn in the mix, that can freeze down and cool the affection and sensitivity of Venus, which of course is exalted in Pisces. So even the best of ties could be tested a little bit, to be honest. And if you are thinking about getting in touch with someone from your past where it didn't go quite as well as you would like, just remind yourself, not in a negative way, but a realistic way, of why things didn't go exactly as you hoped. However, of course, Saturn's very much to do with industry and being realistic. This could be a time when, if you're wanting to really commit yourself to someone at a spiritual level, the tie can get stronger. But if there are weaknesses, it doesn't matter who with. It could be in your friendship circle, with neighbours, with people at work, or in a personal romantic context. Venus applying to Saturn, which is exact on Friday, is going to potentially really be a test point. However, ironically as it is, Venus forges a glorious link to Jupiter. So the two planets of fortune, from Friday through to the end of the week and peaking on Sunday, come into a glorious sextile. And this can be really positive and potentially very lucky. So it just shows that we have to be mindful of all the different cycles. And one of the reasons that Jupiter's joining in with the Venus connection to Saturn is that through the first 3 months of this year, Jupiter and Saturn have been within 3 degrees in a sextile. Now, Jupiter is about growth, Saturn can be about resistance, but they balance each other out really well. So essentially around our relationships or our finances, Venus asks us with Saturn to be realistic, but Jupiter can bring some levity, it can bring some positivity. And that Pisces energy, which may seem to have dissipated with the Sun's arrival in the fiery Aries, where it joined up with Mercury, but also the North Node and Chiron, is not at an end, because another irony is that Mars, the ruler of the sign of Aries, glides into Pisces on Friday, where it's going to be through to the end of April. Now, it's interesting, Mars in Pisces, people who have it natally or in the 12th house often work in a field where they have to dive deep, and literally even as deep sea divers, if they do have Mars in Pisces and potentially in the 12th house as well. But if you have got some outstanding issues from your past, and most of us do, however much we feel we've worked on our baggage. It's amazing how deep-rooted it can be. I actually feel we store it in our bodies. I really believe in Gestalt. And Mars moving through Pisces could mean that our emotions are a bit up and down over the following 6 weeks, despite the thrust that the Sun and Mercury and the North Node, and in a more subtle way Chiron in the sign of Aries, but most of all the Sun's application to Pluto, we still need to be aware of integrating the huge sensitivity that's been washing around us all of late and bringing that into our present. So as we take action with soul, because the soul energy comes from all that Pisces vibe. But what we can do is provide the spark, the initiative, the thrust from that energy of the Sun moving into Aries, and that's what makes this week so incredibly exciting. But it is, for now, a need for all of us to integrate both parts of our situation. So stay in touch with our feelings, but also move into the present and get on the front foot. Please stay with me as I go through each of the 12 signs. If you would like to ascend above the zodiac forecast that's to follow, if you give me 3 pieces of personal birth data, time, date and place, I can produce for you your life roadmap report. This will give you searing insights into the patterns that are played out in your life so far, but critically you can get a much more intimate awareness of what those influences are and therefore guide your life future forwards more effectively. In my special package of 30% off, you can also get your 12 months transits. That's the moving planets in the sky interacting with that unique blueprint, which is totally individual to you. I can produce the chart for you in Placidus, whole sign, or solar if you don't know your time. Please see the link below for more. So Aries on the screen now, your week commencing the 18th of March chart, and you'll see that as the Sun moves into your sign on Wednesday, it will be joining that with Mercury, the North Node and Chiron in your sign. But most of all, the knowledge that this is the beginning on Wednesday of the new astrological year is particularly significant for you. I feel that you're going to start this week potentially feeling very, very tender. But equally, you could find your imagination is absolutely glorious. If you are someone who's very artistic or musical, or you love healing, or you love to receive therapeutic treatments, the start of this week is a fine time to embrace those. But just be aware, you know, with Gemini in that square, there could be someone that, for all the goodwill in the world, may in some ways not necessarily keep a confidence that you share with them. So if there is someone that you know tends to be a bit loose with what they say or tends to exaggerate, that's the type of person you just need to be mindful of as this week begins. But the Sun moving into your sign, it's going to be like a furnace, and it's going to be a furnace that you're going to appreciate. But you know, Aries, it's very important for me to be truthful with you, because I do feel there is a tendency amongst YouTube astrologers to provide very simple messages which don't take into account the overall astrological influences, and therefore people get disappointed that life isn't necessarily going to suddenly redeem itself in some kind of perfect way. But I feel that the Sun moving into your sign and joining with Mercury, the Node and Chiron certainly gives you a glorious chance to get on the front foot, and that link with Pluto is really asking you a big question. Where do you see your long-term future going? Because if you've been questioning that, particularly since Pluto moved into Aquarius on the 21st of January, or even for the 11 weeks last year, if you can really probe that particular theme very carefully, this will help you to use this energy in a very constructive way. Because sometimes we can set goals and ambitions. I've experienced this many times, I'm sure you have as well, where we get there, we get to that, achieving that qualification, or we get that job or that material possession, but actually as we achieve that, it's not the thing that's really driving and inspiring us as much as it used to be. And that's because we've shifted, we've shifted in our relationship to our circumstances, but also we've shifted within ourselves. So if you have been rethinking some things recently, it really wouldn't be a surprise, because there's been such a lot of psychological energy around your situation. And the fact that Venus is going to be applying to Saturn suggests that if a relationship, whether it's with a friend, a colleague, or more personally, isn't feeling like it's the right one for your long term, what Pluto and the Sun are saying is have the confidence to really go for what's right for you, even if it does mean that you have to separate yourself from something. Could even be a job that isn't really feeding and inspiring you in the way that's so important for an Aries person. So I think it is going to be important this week to be conscious of the more psychological, spiritual, and even philosophical sides of your situation. Yes, if you're very clear on what you want to achieve in your life, you can use these more tender energies just to sharpen up your antenna to guide you in terms of your decision making. But if you do feel quite bogged down with grief, sadness, uncertainty, even anxiety, I feel the Sun moving into your sign is going to give you a big shot of extra confidence, but it is asking you with Pluto to think about really sharpening up that long-term plan. And because your ruler Mars moves out of the sector of friendship on Friday and dives deep for the following weeks through to the end of April, there is still some stuff that you may need to work through. But in terms of your finances, that is undoubtedly a glorious opportunity for you as Venus and Jupiter link so productively at the end of this week. And it may be that you're going to hear some good news quite unexpectedly. You know, someone may get in touch who you're not expecting to, who may let you know just how much they've appreciated your dedication, your application over a long period of time, and some kind of prize could come your way as the week draws to a close. But I think this is a week when you could find yourself partially in the present, but also a good part of you can be very much in the more psychological and spiritual dimension too. And that's absolutely fine as long as you can accept it. But just be wary about who you're chatting to this week. And in general, I think social media and world news could actually affect you in a more negative way than is usually the case as this week begins. Welcome Taurus to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 18th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now I'm sharing your chart for the start of the week, and you can see there's a big collective in the sign of Pisces, your 11th house of social interaction, including your ruler Venus. The big story for this week, I feel, is that you're going to be orientating towards the people that you share some kind of idealistic connection. And if there are people who don't quite meet your standards, they could make way. But as Mars thrusts into the sign of Pisces on Friday, this is going to create some new energy that over the weeks through to the end of April can see you revive this part of your situation, but you may need to go through a period of quieter reflection, and that's going to be triggered by the Sun's arrival in Aries and the spring equinox on Wednesday. You may also find yourself thinking very carefully about your professional situation, what your goals and ambitions are. In fact, for a month, if you do just give yourself the space to just detach yourself a little bit and work on your inner world, that can be very beneficial for you in terms of your outer world. Because as this week begins, the Neptune cazimi that occurred at the end of last week clashed with the quarter moon in your sector of self-worth and money. And if there are certain associations you have that are proving costly in terms of time, in terms of energy, or in terms of hard cash, or someone's taken your goodwill and generosity for granted, as your ruler Venus applies to Saturn, which becomes exact on Friday, this could be a point when you start to diverge from a certain person or a certain set of people. Then again, you may not diverge from any individual, you may diverge from a particular cause or plan or direction of travel that you had been invested in. And perhaps you do need to just have a period of reflection, which the sun will help you to do. But when Mars hustles and bustles into your 11th house on Friday, it is going to give you the feist to still make some decisive decisions for sure. And also, Venus, your ruler, forges such an amazing link to Jupiter by the end of this week. So someone could come up absolutely celestial trumps for you. So I feel that this is quite a sensitive week, and there are some acute energies that are playing out in your situation. If you can be attuned to these, you can really work this to your advantage. But there may be some elements of your situation that are going to change or come to a close, or there may be certain associations that you're going to distance yourself from, but there's going to be other longer term plans, other hopes and other associations that will get a lot stronger. But one of the central themes of this week is the whole principle of trust, reliability, sincerity. Put all of your energies towards the people that you feel you have got that accord with, and you don't have to worry about it. And anyone you are worrying about, or any plan you've got that's not quite chiming with you, those are probably the areas or the people that are going to make way. Welcome, Gemini, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 18th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. Late last week there was a quarter moon in your sign. Quarter moons last for a week, and because it occurred on Sunday, it's the dominant influence as you come into this new week. But it's squared up, not just with the sun, a quarter moon is a 90-degree angle between the two, but also with Neptune. Neptune squaring the moon can create distortion, but the combination between the sun and Neptune can be a very positive thing if you work in a creative way, you're a healer, you're in an environment where you can shape things through your senses. If you're in a much harsher worldly connection, perhaps in a corporate structure, and you're really expected to follow the edicts of the management to the letter, and there's not much flexibility, you could find the whole situation quite oppressive as this week begins, because the moon in your sign is asking you to find your voice, to articulate the things that make you an individual. The 10th house is where we have to conform to what's expected, but it can see us attain physical prizes. Now, as this week goes on, Wednesday brings the spring equinox, and it's really exciting because the sun moves into Aries to begin the whole Western tropical cycle again, but in so doing, it's playing catch up with your ruler Mercury, the North Node, and Chiron. So the 11th house is about your long-term hopes, it's about your friendships, your social interaction, and where you network. And that is an area that can really start to shape up. It's possible that if you have been a little bit dissatisfied with your work, or your goals and ambitions have not been very fulfilling, the move of the sun into Aries and its link to Pluto, the planet of transformation, suggests that you may want to download new knowledge, go on a course, retrain, even go back to an academic environment if it helps you to give you a wider opportunity to make progress. But equally, as the week goes on, Venus in the 10th house, which is suggesting that your diplomacy and people skills, very strong often, if they're applied in a very steadfast way, can actually impress someone in a position of influence. But equally, if you work with someone that you don't like, and they tend to be very unreceptive to your best efforts, not very acknowledging or encouraging, again, that kind of frozen kind of corporate world may be something that leaves you a little bit cold. But despite this, Venus does forge an amazing link with Jupiter as this week draws to a close. Because Jupiter's in quite a spiritual part of your situation, maybe your plans or your goals can be shaped by something that's to do with the non-tangible sphere. I know we think about Venus and Jupiter in terms of good fortune financially, and that could fall for you as the week draws to a close. But I feel that if you're seeing into how you can guide your future ambitions in a bit of a different way, it could be knowledge and insights that are just as valuable and lucky for you, but perhaps not at the current time. That said, Mars replaces the Sun in Pisces on Friday, and that thrust of Mars in the 10th house can be so valuable. So if you're needing to reorientate your goals and ambitions, make some moves around your employment or self-employment if you work for yourself or you have your own business, Mars is going to give you a lot of extra conviction and authority, which will last right through to the end of April. So that can be a really valuable asset for you. Of course, it's important with Mars in the 10th house to not seem that we only want things on our terms, but Mars in Pisces can flex a little bit because it's mutable and we can stay a little bit sensitive with, but Mars gives you that extra self-belief, which will be great. But maybe, Gemini, it's going to be a case of who as much as what you know as this week unfolds and as the Sun makes deeper progress into the sign of Aries. But being conscious of working or having a role in life that you find is uplifting and meaningful, and not being only focused on the status side of things, is really the big message of this week. And if you are in a role that's very unfulfilling, it may be that you're going to think longer term and make some changes that really serve up opportunities for you down the track, but you can prime them up from now for long-term benefit. Welcome, Cancer, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 18th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. If you're someone with a passion for art, for photography, or even watching films, you can be really inspired at the very start of this week as the Sun continues its alignment to Neptune. But right at the end of last week, the quarter moon in your 12th house, which is a very tender area, squared up not just to the Sun, but also the cazimi with Neptune. So the potential at the start of this week is that you can have an amplified sense of sensitivity. And that means that you can be very, very perceptive, but it could see you feeling a little bit overwhelmed. However, the opportunity to shake things up and bring some variety to your situation is going to develop as this week goes on. And some of the sluggishness that can come from the Sun applying to Neptune can make way for a furnace-like energy as Mars hustles and bustles its way into Pisces on Friday. And it's going to be with you in that sector right through to the end of April. So if the conjunction between the Sun and Neptune at the start of this week does see you tripping the light fantastic or thinking about travel destinations, Mars can give you the wherewithal to drive those plans forwards. But if you're wanting to shake things up in a more worldly context, not least in terms of what you do for a living, your goals and ambitions, the spring equinox on Wednesday is a critical moment in the whole year's story. The Sun climbs into the most visible part of your situation, known as the midheaven. But here it's going to be linking up with Mercury, the North Node, and also Chiron. Your chance to shine, to elevate your talents to a wider audience, is really going to be leveraged up in a big way. Not just this week, but also on the back of the solar eclipse, which is coming on the 8th of April. But what makes this year's spring equinox so unique is it links to Pluto in the part of your situation where you're most invested for the first time in over 200 years. This combination can be very transformational. So if that energy at the start of the week, which is seeing you want to break out in some way or experiment, to travel, to do something that's more spontaneous. It could be around your professional situation, around your, as much as around your personal interest too. And the sun's alignment to Pluto can give you a fantastic amount of determination and drive if you are wanting to receive greater acclaim for your talents. However, Venus does apply to Saturn as the week goes on. It becomes exact on Friday, and this is going to be a critical point in a relationship because Venus in the 9th house is a truth seeker, as I mentioned last week. When we put Saturn in the mix, we're going to see you more determined to get the answers, not necessarily that you want, but you certainly want them to be authentic. If there is somebody that you've been drawn to, therefore, but they have been a little bit, not necessarily evasive, perhaps a little bit elusive, even mysterious, the Sun combining with Neptune, or you've not been quite sure of their intentions, you're going to demand to know where you stand as this week evolves. But beyond that, Venus then goes on to apply to Jupiter, which reaches the peak on Sunday. This is one of the luckiest influences in astrology, and that 9-11th house link is wonderful if you are wanting to travel, particularly if you can go with someone you get on particularly well with or have a strong spiritual alignment to, or you're finding yourself drawn to some kind of spirit guide. That's entirely possible towards the end of this week as well. But it's that Mars moving from Aquarius into Pisces through to the end of April on Friday, which is really going to give you the drive and the traction. So at the start of this week, if you are feeling very sensitive, perhaps finding certain strands in your situation, as I mentioned, a little bit overwhelming, or perhaps your experience of information, how you're downloading information, is seeing you see things in a new way, but not necessarily that an easy realization. By the end of this week, I think you will have turned everything around. And the part of Cancerians that I feel is often missed in more popular astrology is that because you're a cardinal sign, you are a leader. Yes, you can be protective. Yes, you can be a little bit defensive, perhaps even withdraw at times, maybe even a little bit moody. But when you really set your intentions to something that's important to you, it's a very rare Cancerian who's not absolutely brilliant at marshalling and managing situations, whether it's at home or in a professional situation too. So if you're fancying a change, whether in terms of your goals and your connection to the wider world, or you're wanting a change in terms of your personal situation, although you may start this week feeling a little bit overwhelmed and very tender, by the end of the week I think you will be gaining significant traction. Welcome Leo to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 18th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. There is a dichotomy to your chart this week, Leo. On one hand, the Sun powering into your sister fire sign of Aries on Wednesday, starting the Western tropical astrological year. It's a chance for you to shake things up, be more adventurous, independent, break out, travel, learn new skills. It could even see you wanting to be more rugged physically in terms of outdoor pursuits. But that forges a superb link to Pluto, which moved into your sector of relating on the 21st of January. And the chances are, if you can work closely with someone on a plan that is to do with expansion, it could be a very enthusiastic partnership. But the dichotomy comes because the 8th house of your situation, which is a very psychological area where we're really needing to invest of ourselves emotionally, spiritually or financially, there are some rather mixed energies there. At the very start of the week, the Sun's application to Neptune suggests if you're not getting clear messages back from someone you've been involved with recently, you may feel the time is to break free and to reclaim your personal autonomy. But on the other hand, Venus in that area applies to Saturn, and that too could lead to some tense conversations. It could be about sex and intimacy, it may be about shared resources. But equally, Venus applying to Saturn can give you a return if you've invested in a situation and really worked hard, and now you could get the payback, because Venus can be about money and the 8th house can be about investments. And also Venus and Jupiter, the two planets of fortune, come together in a sensational way at the end of this week. And if you are wanting to raise your profile or receive greater acclaim for your talents and your skills professionally, that too is a really good portent. What's not to like? Well, it's just that with the Sun moving into Aries, it joins up with Mercury, joins up with the North Node, and also with Chiron. And that 9th house energy could see you wanting to experiment more and maybe even travel. Certainly break free of anything that's cloying or is rather possessive or controlling. And if there is any of that going on in a close relationship, that's flagged up by the quarter moon, which occurred at the end of last week, but provides a backdrop for the whole of this week in house 11. That's where you need to be a free spirit and connect to people, because not because you have to, but because it's a commonality that you share. You enjoy collaborating and cooperating with one another. But if there is some politics or jealousy swirling around, that may be something you do want to break free from. So if you're all in and it's working well, whether it's in a romantic context, a business or financial context, as by Friday Mars powers into the 8th house, your determination to really start to get a return on all the ideas you've been generating is going to be incredible right through to the end of April. But if you're in a situation where you feel that you can't really devote yourself, perhaps because of mixed signals from the other side, perhaps because you're not really getting the right sensory indicators, then that energy in Aries is really encouraging you to reclaim your personal space and your independence. So that's the dichotomy of this week. But there can be a super positive outcome by the end of the week. But if there is a relationship, particularly a sexual relationship, that hasn't really been working, Venus applying to Saturn could be the end point. And the Sun with Mercury, with the North Node and Chiron in the 9th house may just see you think, do you know, I've really worked at this, it's not going to work out as I want, I need to liberate myself. But if you're all in and it's being reciprocated, and there is a kind of sense that you can be yourself and not lose your autonomy while still being devoted, well, this can be a really important and powerful week, psychologically, spiritually, and financially, as well as possibly intimately too. Welcome Virgo to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 18th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. As last week came to a close, the moon was really high in the sky for you personally, the 10th house. However you were feeling, it was probably hard to disguise it. But it was squaring up to the Neptune Cazimi, which occurred as last week closed on Sunday. And that's the start of this week's story. The application of that quarter moon is still there because it provides a backdrop for the whole of this week. And the Sun being in a conjunction with Neptune in your sector of relating has a number of different facets. If you're really in touch with someone and very close, this can be a magical energy that you experience at the start of this week. If you're trying to connect to someone but they seem elusive, you don't quite know where you stand, they're not returning your calls, there's a mystery there which you find intriguing, but also a frustration that you're not absolutely sure of what the score is. That's equally possible with the Sun and Neptune together. But as the week goes on Wednesday the Sun moves out of your sector of relating and moves into the 8th house. The 7th house is almost like the conversation, the 8th house is the outcome. because the 8th house is the sector of transformation, but the sun moving there into Aries is the start of the Western tropical astrological year, and it actually forges a brilliant link to Pluto. If you're wanting to be more entrepreneurial, marshal your resources shrewdly, perhaps develop a business idea even further. If you want to get a job that gives you an opportunity to use your skills in terms of managing resources more astutely, then that's a great change. But it may mean breaking free of some kind of relationship that you have at the present time, but it doesn't have to be in a romantic context. Now, as the week goes on, Venus, which is in your 7th house, encouraging you to be diplomatic, moves into a freezing embrace with Saturn. If you've got a relationship in your world with a friend, a neighbour, a sibling, or a partner which is not going so well, and you're feeling that it's more give than get, you may want to really assert yourself with Venus applying to Saturn, which becomes exact on Friday. But you know, also on Friday, Mars moves into your 7th house, replacing the Sun, and this brings much more thrust and steeliness. If someone isn't listening and isn't respecting you, you're going to set your boundary really much more firmly, not just at the end of this week, but right through to the end of April. But it can work in another way. If you're not in a relationship at the moment, Mars being in the 7th house can give you much more desire to connect. But also Venus and Jupiter. Jupiter, along with Uranus, in a very experimental part of your situation, a very adventurous one. If you do meet someone towards the end of this week that you find really makes your pulse race, this relationship could turn out to be very lucky, but it may mean that you're the one who has to make the first move. And if you're someone who's usually a little bit tentative about doing that, you don't want to expose yourself, don't want to take the risk, you can stay safe, but an opportunity may pass you by. It's that critical, the set of influences at the end of this week, as far as your relationships are concerned. But it may mean that you can connect to someone in a non-romantic way, but who has a shared set of values or an interest that you can mutually coalesce around. But that energy of the Sun moving into your 8th house, joining up with your ruler Mercury, the North Node and Chiron, the 8th house is about transformations, and some big transformations are coming for you over the next 6 months, not least because the solar eclipse on the 8th of April is combining with Chiron, the wounded healer. And if intimacy or deep connections has been an area that you're not really feeling rewarded around, I think the energies of this week are really going to sharpen up your understanding of what you want, what you're prepared to give, but also what you're not prepared to accept. So it just depends whether you're a free spirit at the moment but would like to meet someone, or if you're in a relationship which is going well, that can get deeper. But if you're in a relationship which is not working so good, I think the time has come when you're going to say how you feel. You can use a certain amount of charm through Venus, but a certain amount of assertion through Mars. Welcome Libra to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 18th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. As last week came to a close, there was a quarter moon in your sister air sign of Gemini. That's very much about freedom, but that's squared up to the Sun and Neptune in the Cazimi on Sunday, in the part of your situation to do with commitments and responsibilities. You may start this week feeling a little bit low in physical vitality, but also perhaps potentially a little bit resentful if you feel that your goodwill, sacrifice, hard work and application are being taken for granted to such a degree that your needs and your freedoms are being compromised. But the great news, Libra, is that on Wednesday, the Sun powers into your opposite sign, returning to Aries, the start of the Western tropical year. This is your 7th house, joining up with Mercury, the North Node and Chiron. The 7th house is going to offer you so many wonderful opportunities, but particularly from the solar eclipse of the 8th of April over the next half year. But it is about really understanding where you're perhaps giving your power and perhaps sacrificing too much of yourself in slightly the wrong way. It's not because you're not being perhaps well-intentioned. It may be that other people are taking you a little bit for granted, or perhaps you're working too hard at not quite the right thing. And the reason I'm saying this is because your ruler Venus is going to be applying to Saturn as this week goes on. Venus gives you great charm and a great ability to relate to people skillfully. But what Saturn does is bring a slice of reality to that part of your nature that likes to be a good egg, and really asks you to think again. Also, because on Friday, Mars moves into your 6th house, whereas Neptune since 212, Saturn since 223, and more recently the cluster of energy in Pisces have really been putting you under quite a lot of strain, I feel, in terms of sacrificing your energy and your time to support other people, at least encouraging you to be very virtuous and focus on your work a lot. And that's probably taken quite a lot of energy out of you. But Mars moving into your 6th house is really going to bolster you. If you're someone who is interested in exercise and keeping well, right through to the end of April, you could find that any fitness New Year's resolutions that you made that may have got slightly pushed to one side, you can reignite them from the end of this week through to the end of April in a very positive way. Also, if you feel that you are working too hard, perhaps in the wrong job, or you don't have very appreciative or respectful colleagues, Mars is going to make you feistier, and that can see you looking to make a change. If you're going to really apply yourself and be dedicated, which you may want to do, it's vital it's in the right situation, and Mars will help you to really shape the outcome in a more assertive manner. But that change, that spring equinox, really is fantastic because it also links to Pluto in your 5th house, which since the 21st of January, along with Mercury initially, then Venus and Mars, has been evoking you to express your creativity and your individuality. And you can do this in spades over the next 6 months, but you probably will shine best where you can collaborate. Don't beat yourself up about it if that's the case. If you're someone who enjoys working closely with someone, this can be a partnership if one is in place at the present time that can grow, because Pluto and the Sun in a sextile can be where we evolve. But equally, if you don't have that at the present time, someone may be about to emerge in your situation from the 8th of April right through to the solar eclipse in your sign on the 2nd of October. So there's lots to look forward to in how you relate, but it's key that you get your boundaries sharper in terms of what you give, how you give, in terms of being dedicated, precise and applied, particularly if you're putting a lot in and not feeling that you're getting so much out, or it's compromising your freedom, which is the story right at the start of this week. So by the end of the week, Venus, your ruler, also forges an awesome alliance with Jupiter. Jupiter is the planet, the grand benefic, the planet of fortune. Venus, the lesser benefic, still a planet of fortune and prosperity. They're coming together in a superb alliance, one of the luckiest in astrology. All the hard work and dedication can come back to you at the end of this week, for sure. But it's possible that if it does, it could be really quite life-changing for you, because Jupiter in the 8th house suggests that something could come through for you which really gives you a reward for some devotion you've shown over a long period of time. Perhaps the reward is that you're just going to get closer to someone that you've been seeing romantically, but in a practical context, you're working things out together and your collaboration is starting to shape up really well. But it's the thrust of Mars from Friday. It's going to give you a lot more vitality. So even if you start this week feeling a little bit low in energy, as I mentioned before, maybe even a bit resentful about how much you're having to put in, as long as you can mark out your boundary and forge more constructive relationships, there's so much that's heading in the right direction for you. Welcome Scorpio to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 18th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now, I'm showing the event chart for the start of the week for your sign. You can see there's a gathering of energy in House 5. This is where you can get creative but also have fun. But one of those influences is the Sun's combination with Neptune, which is very, very sensitive. If you are someone who really enjoys more artistic activities, you could find yourself inspired at the start of this week. But the 5th house is also about romance. And as we came to the end of last week, the quarter moon was in the part of your situation, which is very much to do with the potential for tangles, jealousy, possessiveness, and so on. If you're not feeling very free around an association you have at the moment, the fact that Venus goes on to apply to Saturn this week can give you serious food for thought. In essence, if it's not working so well, it may give you a desire to break free. And part of that can come from the spring equinox, which occurs on Wednesday, linking to your modern ruler of Pluto. That's going to help you to really analyse your situation with a great deal of clarity. But it may mean that if practically you're not feeling fulfilled, you will want some kind of change, at the least an improvement by the other person understanding your needs better. But the great news is that your traditional ruler Mars joins your 5th house on Friday, and this brings a whole load of extra energy and vitality. It's been in your 4th house for some time, and to be honest, that's quite a tricky transition. And there may have been times over the last 6 weeks when your mood was quite up and down, or you felt a bit prickly or defensive. Now you can feel much more outgoing. And even if you do want to discuss something of a sensitive nature with a partner or someone that you're working with creatively, you're going to just feel so much more self-confident and assured about broaching the subject involved. But when Venus applies to Saturn, it certainly can give us a sober outlook. But ironically, by the end of this week, it's applying to Jupiter, the planet of fortune, in the most glorious of ways. So even if you do have a heart-to-heart, and it's not an easy conversation, there's plenty of potential by the end of this week to be on much better terms with someone that maybe you've been finding it hard to reach that mutual understanding with. But if you're not so happy around your work, I think what the spring equinox is encouraging you to do is think about where you can express yourself more fulsomely. So if you're in a job which feels very limiting in terms of your individual creativity, I think that's something you're going to start to want to change over the next 13 weeks. Welcome Sagittarius to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 18th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now, I'm showing your event chart for the start of the week. You can see that the Sun and Neptune are side by side in your 4th house. This is going to make you much more sensitive to your immediate environment, whether it's to do with where you live itself or the surroundings. That's something that you just seem to have a greater connection with. You may even find yourself feeling much more sentimental about emotional issues or even about family members. But as last week came to a close, there was a quarter moon in your sector of relating, and that energy is going to pour itself all through the back of this week, and that was in the sign of Gemini. For you, the sector of partnerships. So if a partnership or a relationship does feel a bit muddled or confused at the start of this week, it wouldn't be a surprise. So for example, if you're with someone that you're deeply invested with, but you don't feel that they have a good perception of how you're feeling unless you actually make it clear, that could be something that could be quite frustrating. But you get a huge lift on Wednesday, Sagittarius, when the sun bustles into Aries, your sister fire sign, and this brings in the spring equinox and the start of the Western tropical astrological year. The following 13 weeks are a real opportunity for you to demonstrate just how passionate and individualistic you can be. Look to showcase your creativity over that period of time. But because the sun is angling to Pluto, newly arrived in your third house of everyday communication and ideas, the conviction that that combination can give you can help to dispel some of the mists that that quarter moon and that combination between the sun and Neptune created. But it is true that as Venus moves forwards this week, also in Pisces, it applies to Saturn. If you're trying to make some changes to your home, be a bit more organised, or perhaps decluttering, redecorating, perhaps getting some new furnishings. If you're in the north, working on your garden space. If you're on the south, perhaps harvesting some vegetables that you've grown. That can be a lovely thing to do. But if that lack of emotional connection is still showing itself, with Venus applying to Saturn, it could make you feel much more inclined to protect your boundaries and your emotional needs. And one of the outcomes from this is that with Mars moving into your fourth house on Friday, it's going to make you feistier about protecting your position. For example, if you've been getting some work done at home and someone's proved unreliable, perhaps even a little bit evasive, not giving you a clear timetable of when they're going to get the work done, Mars moving into your fourth house is really going to see you talk to them and motivate them and let them know clearly that you're not satisfied with the delays. But also, as the week draws to a close, Venus and Jupiter your ruler, come into a glorious alliance. If you do work from home, or you're a keen hobbyist or crafter, you can really be in your element as this week draws to a close. If you are thinking about selling a property or trying to get a lease on a new rental, that can be actually a very hopeful indicator. So as much as the sun applying to Neptune can create confusion, Venus applying to Saturn make you cooler about where you feel you're not getting your needs met, by the end of the week I feel that you're going to be on much stronger form and really taking on any challenges, but most of all wowing people with the force of your personality. Welcome Capricorn to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 18th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now I'm showing the event chart for the start of your week. You can see the Sun is applying to Neptune. This is a magical combination if we want to access our imagination. But the third house is to do with everyday communication. So whether it's to do with tech, a domestic appliance, or it is to do with having a chat with someone that you have quite a frequent connection to, there is the possibility of a misunderstanding. Also, because the quarter moon at the end of last week pours its energy into the whole of this week, and that's in your sector of obligations, the combination between the two is asking you to prioritise. You can't do everything. And in fact, your physical vitality might be quite low at the start of this week, but your psychic antenna can be really extended in the most perceptive of ways. The problem with the Sun combining with Neptune is that we can almost get overwhelmed with too much information. Now, what's going to help you as this week goes on is that Venus, the planet of relating, is going to apply to your ruler Saturn, and that's going to help you to get more businesslike and also distill the importance of certain messages or exchanges you have. But by Wednesday we have the brilliant spring equinox, and this year, as the Sun makes its return to Aries and we begin the Western tropical year, it forges a stunning link to Pluto in your sector of self-worth, everyday money, but also your values. And it's possible with the Sun moving into your fourth house and joining up with Mercury, the North Node, and Chiron, that you're thinking a lot about your environment, your emotional needs, where you live, how you live there and who with. There could be some big changes coming for you over the next 6 months. That could be that you're going to renovate or change or modify where you are. Perhaps work hard on your garden if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, or do some decorative stuff too. But this week, it's more to do with the thought processes that take that forward and the interactions you have with others. If there has been a bit of a blockage with someone recently, as Venus meets up with Saturn later this week, by Thursday, you may need to have a heart-to-heart. But it's important to listen to what the other person says, as well as express your side of the equation. That said, by Friday, with Mars bustling into Pisces, where it's going to be through to the end of April, your desire to be much clearer about what your ideas are, to connect with people in a more powerful way, to find greater traction around the things that really interest you, is really going to be turned up to max. But also, as this week draws to a close, there's a joyous link between Venus and Jupiter. So as much as Saturn may shake out something that's not working for you, or a situation which is not comfortable, there can be an opportunity that emerges by the end of this week that really gives you a huge sense of uplift. Jupiter's in your 5th house. That's very much to do with the glories of life, pleasures, sociability. It's your personal expression. And that link with Venus means that suddenly, where words and thoughts may have felt a little bit confused or inhibited and things aren't flowing, suddenly you're really expressing yourself with a great deal of conviction. So it could prove to be a confusing and low energy start to the week, but a much better and more upbeat and potentially fortunate end to this week for you. Welcome Aquarius to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 18th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now, I'm showing the event chart for all your planetary positions as the week begins. And you can see the Sun and Neptune are still together as they were at the end of last week in the sign of Pisces. Let's go back to when Neptune moved into Pisces in 2012. It's possible since then you've developed quite a lot of idealism around your resources, and you've probably been an avid supporter of good causes. What happened a year ago was that Saturn came along and really asked you to think carefully about where you were being generous, and also to marshal your everyday resources a little bit more cutely. Now, at the end of last week, the quarter moon in Gemini, your sister air sign, squared up to that Neptune cazimi. And it's possible that if the pressure has been on of late, you did go out over the weekend and enjoy a little bit of escapism and social interaction. Why not? But the reality, the harsh reality, is that Saturn does retain its location in your 2nd house. Venus has given you some uplift recently, but you may feel a little bit unsure about the foundations in your world. Maybe your physical vitality has been affected by the practical realities of your situation, and therefore things can feel a bit overwhelming as this week begins. But the wonderful news, Aquarius, is that on Wednesday the Sun joins up with Mercury, with the North Node and Chiron in the sign of Aries. But more importantly, this is the start of the Western tropical astrological calendar, and the Sun angles to Pluto in your sign. This hasn't happened for over 200 years. It's that extraordinarily exciting. So Pluto in your sign will continue through to the 2nd of September, and then again from the 18th of November this year, continue to provoke change in your situation. But you're going to be much more in charge of the process rather than since 2008, when Pluto was attacking the more psychological elements of your situation. So that angle between the Sun, how you think, how you speak, the 3rd house, how you interact, share ideas, and the sheer passion and force but change agenda of Pluto collaborating together is going to put you back on the front foot. Now, it is true that Venus is going to be applying to Saturn as this week goes on, and if finances have been tender and a mute point, things could feel quite squeezed. But the great news is that on Friday, Mars moves out of your sign. And if you've been really working hard over the previous 6 weeks, now over the next 6 weeks, Mars is going to give you much more thrust in order to turn that desire of Venus to improve your finances into something more tangible. But there's more, because by the end of this week, Jupiter, the planet of fortune, in traditional astrology known as the greater benefic, links to Venus, in traditional astrology the lesser benefic. So the two planets of fortune are collaborating as this week draws to a close. There could be happy news around a family matter, around a property, perhaps an application on a rental, or if you're looking to buy, but also just a greater sense of being serene with whatever you're dealing with. Because as much as Venus applying to Saturn, particularly around a romantic situation, if you and a partner have a different approach to spending money, that could be a clash point this week. I can't disguise that. But equally, Venus applying to Saturn is seeing you get the balance that perhaps Neptune since 2012 saw you missing a little bit. If you're a bit too idealistic, Venus applying to Saturn helps you to readdress things and create a firmer basis in a way that's sustainable and can work for the longer term. So there may not be a huge abundance at this stage, but it's traveling in the right direction. And then the thrust of Mars, the good fortune of Jupiter and Venus, can see some surprise news emerge as this week draws to a close. So what can start as perhaps a confusing and perhaps rather enervating and draining start to the week can develop into something so much more exciting for you. Welcome Pisces to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 18th of March for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now I'm showing the event chart for the start of the week, and you can see the Sun is side by side with your ruler Neptune. In fact, your two rulers are going to be a big part of this week's story. So the week begins with the potential for you to use your intuition, your psychic abilities, your instincts in a very effective way, right? Well, maybe not, because the quarter moon, which occurred at the end of last week, was in your 4th house of your emotion. The 1st house is where you want to take action, and Neptune's not really a planet of action, is it? It's much more of a spiritual dimension. So you could start this week actually feeling a bit underpowered, maybe even a little bit confused or overwhelmed, especially with some personal considerations. And there has been a paradox in your situation of late, because as much as you have had the posse of influences in your sign, you've also had the strident energies of Mars and Pluto still in Aquarius, and they've been accentuating the relationships that are not so strong, and also some more psychological debris that may still be floating around inside of you, to be honest. So as we start this week, I feel that you could be feeling exceptionally tender. However, the great news is that Sun moves out of your sign on Wednesday into Aries, where of course it's lit up by the fire of this sign, which is governed by Mars, and it forges a really positive link to Pluto. So if since the 21st of January you have been doing a lot of soul searching and not quite finding it as easy to be in the present, I think what you can do now is make a lot more sense of the process you've been going through. But the Sun moving into your 2nd house in a more practical sense is an opportunity to convert the ideas you've been working on recently into something more tangible. However, as this week goes on, Venus in your sign, which has definitely been giving you an even greater sense of gorgeousness, does connect with Saturn. And let's go back a year ago to when Saturn moved into your sign. If you are born early in the sign of Pisces, you probably haven't had such an easy time of it over the last 12 months. Now, Venus moving into your sign has definitely been promoting the concept that you could give yourself some kind of makeover or start some new creative projects. you're really inspired when you are doing something that has a meaning beyond the practical, and Venus is helping that. But what Saturn's saying is that it needs to be shaped in some kind of way that makes it tangible. So if you've had some great ideas of late but haven't known how to structure them, the Sun moving into Aries and the start of the Western tropical year and Venus applying to Saturn will give you a much greater opportunity to get some kind of foundational elements in place. But there's more. Because on Friday, probably the highlight of this week in some ways, is that Mars makes its way into your sign after those 6 long, very psychological weeks in Aquarius, where you may have felt that your moods were very up and down. There may have been times when you felt very tearful, at other times quite annoyed. So Mars moving into your sign brings you into the present. And as much as Venus and Saturn can be a very cold link, and if there is a relationship of any kind that hasn't been working very well, particularly if you feel that someone's not been very loyal, whether it is a family member through the quarter moon, or whether it is a friend or a connection, someone in your network, or perhaps even in a romantic context, Mars moving into your sign gives you more fierceness, more thrust. So as much as Venus applies to Saturn, sees you thinking more coolly, it may help you, this combination, to separate yourself from something that just hasn't been working. So you could enter a part of the year when you're starting afresh as this week draws to a close, but then Venus and Jupiter forge one of the most lucky influences in astrology on Sunday. And it's quite extraordinary, really. So I feel as you start this week, if you are feeling a bit dispirited, underpowered, lacking in motivation, or conversely, your perceptions are so strong, it's making it difficult to block out the emotions and sensations that you're picking up, even in a non-verbal way from others. By the end of the week, you're going to be feeling so much more energized. You're going to be on the front foot. Even if there is something painful to get through with Venus applying to Saturn, your determination to really go with what's right for you and get a firmer grip on your life direction is going to be clear as the week comes to a close. And there can be a lucky conversation as the celestial curtain comes down on the week. If you are someone who enjoys a flutter, I wouldn't be against it, with Jupiter and Venus in a beautiful sextile, particularly with Jupiter in your 3rd house. That's very much to do with modern technology. And Jupiter, of course, the greater benefic, Venus the lesser, the 2 planets of fortune, really give you so much uplift as this week draws to a close.